For our quiz program, we'll start here and create an IPO chart. So with our quiz, the main input, there's going to be really two bits of input. And first of all, the user will be asked to input the number of questions that they want to answer. So number of questions to answer. And secondly, they'll be putting in answers to questions. So they'll be the inputs. In terms of the outputs, we'll want to do a few things. We want to ask, let's make that a bit bigger. We want to ask how many questions. So that'll be the first piece of output that the user will see. And then we will ask a question. And then we will indicate, we'll print if answer is correct or not. And that's it for the output. And then in terms of the actual processing, well, we need to let's also make this bigger. We need to store the number of questions. Actually in the input, I forgot, this is the sort of the actual user input, but in fact, if we make a sort of a heading that says that, so I'm going to say user input, but in these IPO charts, we also need to include the data that's input just at the start of the program in terms of what sort of data we declare when it begins. So I'm going to actually just call this like program data input. Get rid of those two I's there. Program data input. And this would be our list of questions and our list of answers. And that's it really, I think, for the start. We might come back and update this, but I think that's right. So we need to, anyway, back to the processing. We need to store the number of questions that the user has input. And then we need to begin, well, we want to begin actually asking the questions. So, but before we do that, we want to set up a system where we loop or we iterate asking, and iterate just means to repeat. Iterate asking a question for as many times as the user indicated they want to. Well, they want to answer. Okay. So we're going to iterate over that. And then, as part of that, we're actually going to ask a question. We're going to, and actually before we do that, we're going to generate a random number between 0 and the length of the list, and then using that random number, we're actually going to basically ask a question. And in fact, let's be more specific here. We're going to say print value from questions list at index position equal to random number, the random number that we picked. So, if our random number that we chose was 3, then we would go to the actually the fourth item in the list, which has an index number of 3 because we started at 0, and we would print that question. And then we're going to wait for the user input, and then we're going to store user input. And then we're going to compare. When I say user input, I should really say the answer. Let's be a bit more specific here. Wait for answer, and then store that answer into a variable. And then we're going to compare the answer to the value in the answers list at, also at position random number. Okay. And then we'll say sort of if answer correct, or if answer matches really, print correct. Oops. Print correct. Or if answer does not match. In fact, rather than if, we would say, else print incorrect. Okay. Should actually be a comma there. All right. Okay, and then we've already indicated that we're going to iterate. Basically, at this point, we'd come back up and we'd ask, we'd generate another random number and we'd ask another question. But we've already indicated here that we're going to iterate over these instructions. It probably wouldn't hurt here, though, to say, repeat or just even ask next question. If, if number of questions asked is still less than the number to answer, something like that. Okay, so that's about it for our processing. Now that we've reached this point, what we can do is begin to write our program in pseudocode. And so when we say pseudocode, it's going to be similar to code, but not quite as exact, but almost. So, and in fact, when we do this, sort of convention is we'll just say begin, and then right down, we'll have an end. And then inside here, let's actually declare we can still in pseudocode still declare our variables as if we were going to normally. So here I'm just going to say Q1 for question 1, Q2, and let's have Q3. Okay, and then rather than list, I shouldn't call that list. That would be questions, and then we would have answers. So I'm just going to say, that would be answer 1, answer 2, answer 3. All right, and then what else? We want to now, basically we want to say num of questions. And then we would say, we could just say user inputs number to answer. Here's where it's pseudo, we don't need to actually say the exact thing, more just what's going to happen. So that would be the number of questions. And then we could do something like while num of questions. So we still include our while thing here, but we could, just say less than okay. So while actually, what we've got to create another variable here. And that is number answered, and that would be set to 0 to begin with. And actually, we want to put we would say while the number answered is less than the num of questions, and num of questions is like the number to actually answer, then in real Python we'd put that, but we could just say then Now we still want to, in pseudocode, still indent the stuff that goes underneath that actually belongs to the while loop. So we'd have while, well that's true, while the number answered is less than the number of questions. Then we would pick a random number. So we say random number equals, and we're going to say pick a random number between 0 and 2, and then we're going to say print questions, at position random number, and then here I'm just going to say wait for input. I'll just say wait for answer. And then we're going to say if answer, well, I was going to say is equal to answers at position random number. So if that's true, so we still treat it like a normal if statement. We still indent here. And in fact, one good thing that you can do in pseudocode is for these, like the whiles and the ifs and the else's, actually put them in capitals. It just makes them a little bit easier to read like this. So if answer is equal to answer's random number, then, so if it's true, then we want to print, correct. You can sort of optional to put the quotes here in pseudocode. Else, print incorrect. Okay. And all right. And then out of the ifs, but still in the loop, we actually want to say number answered. We need to indicate that the number answered is actually equal to itself plus 1, and then we would have end. We could say end while here, and that when the while ends, it doesn't end straight away. It pops back up and checks if this condition is still true. If it's still true, then it will run all of this inside, but eventually it won't be true. Eventually number answered won't be less than the number of questions, and then that loop will end. And then finally we could say print something like thanks for playing. Okay, great. And so that's kind of the pseudocode. One thing to note with this pseudocode is that not completely, but more or less, there should be one line of pseudocode for every one line of code that you're actually going to have in the program. So we actually put, and especially we put in the whiles, and we put in, if else's, and most of the things we don't put in the actual Python instructions here, or whatever language you're using. Okay, but the idea is that basically we can use this, and it's pretty close to the real code that we'll end up writing. So what you can actually do then is we're going to copy this, and then actually in Python, so here I'm using something, it's called idle Python. It's like a local. It's free, you can just download it and install it on either Mac or PC. And so I'm actually going to, as a comment up the top, paste in all that code, and now have a go at actually writing the real code. So to begin with here then, I'm going to need to import random. We don't bother with saying things like, oh, you have to import this and import that in the pseudocode. We just, say pick a random number. Okay, so import random. This was, pretty much the real code. And pseudocode, you could technically say create a list of questions here, but it's good to be a bit more specific with the actual, something like a list, and indicate what kind of data and possibly how much data you'll have in there. So we've got those ones. And then, oops, let me just make a bit more space down here. Okay, so we've got that. We've got our lists of questions, our list of answers. And then, actually I'm just going to copy and paste these two here. Put them here. But for number of questions, we want to change this to sort of real Python. And the way we can do that is we say input, how many questions would you like to try? Like that. Okay. All right. So then whatever number is typed in will be a number of questions. And in fact, we need to convert that value because it'll come in as like a piece of text or string. We need to convert that to an actual integer. So again, in the actual pseudocode, we just say, user inputs number to answer. We don't worry about the actual detail of, the specific input command or actually converting it to an integer. We just say more or less what we're going to do. Okay. Then number answered equals 0. We can leave that. That's actually just legitimate Python. Now we're going to set up our while loop. So let's say while number answered is less than the number of questions. So while that's true, we're going to keep repeating whatever is inside here. And again, the convention in pseudocode is to say while, then you condition, then. Rather than a then in Python, we just do the colon, the double dots. Okay, so while number answered is less than number of questions, then let's actually, this is a good point actually to just test that what we've got so far is actually working, because more or less actually we should, most lines, give it a test and make sure we don't have any errors, because if you write heaps of lines of code and you're not actually testing it, then there is an error. It can be hard to know which line there, but if you test it line by line, we can sort of eliminate that. So I'm going to run this and I'm going to say 3 questions. Okay, so this does have a problem. It's stuck on this so-called infinite loop. So let's go see. Hopefully I can kill that. Yeah, okay. All right, so the problem here was number answered was actually never incrementing. So, it was basically each time it ran, it was just stuck on 0. And 0 was always going to be less than the number 3 that we ended up here, that I did by typing in. So what I'm going to do is say number answered equals number answered plus 1. You should always remember in a while loop to actually increment what's in the loop. Run module. I'm going to say 3 again, and this time ask a question. So it ran the right number of times. So we've got a loop set up that's doing the right thing, basically. Okay, so rather than just print ask a question, get rid of that line, and we're going to actually, we'll ask a real question out of the list here. So to do that, I'm going to say random number. And again, really we are, we're following the pseudocode pretty close here. So here we're up to this step, random number. Pick a random number between 0 and 2. Okay, so to do that in Python, we say random.rand int, and then we specify the range, which is 0 to 2. Okay, and then with that stored, and again, it can be useful just, as we go, let's just test each line and make sure we've got something running. Run it, and I'm going to try 5. Right, so we're printing out, and it is seeming to pick random numbers between 0 and 2, so that's good. All right, so now we actually want to collect the answer. Let's just check here. So we want to print a question and wait for the answer. Here, actually, wait for answer, perhaps, and then maybe store the answer. And in Python, they've written print the actual question at position random number, wait for that answer, and store the answer. In Python, we're actually going to do that all in one line, and that's okay. Whilst I said earlier, it's good to try and get go line for line pseudocode to real code. Sometimes it won't be. Sometimes you'll have a bit more pseudocode or even a bit less pseudocode compared to real code. So long as it's pretty similar, then you know that it's you're on the right track. Okay, so answer equals input, and we're going to ask. Well, actually, all we're going to ask is the whatever's stored at questions, position random number. And then we're going to store that in there. So let's check that we're actually, we're not actually checking the answer, but let's check that we're basically printing out the thing. So there was question 2. It was said we got still printing out the random number. We got question 1. We got question 2. There we go. We finished. Okay. So let's now actually get rid of this print. What we're going to do is put in our if here. We're going to say if answer is equal to, or matches, that's double equals, answers, so, if answer, singular, if the answer matches what's at the answers list at position random number, if that's true, so we double dots, then we want to print correct. Okay. Else, double dots, we want to print incorrect. Okay. Alright, so let's test this out now. And in fact, even after the loop's finished, we'll put our print. Thanks for playing. Okay, so hopefully it's the whole thing now. Okay, we'll try 3 questions. So Q1, the answer is A1, that's correct. This one I'll put in something that would be incorrect, and then Q1, the answer should be, thanks for playing. Okay, great, so that's pretty much done. We could go back here, and we could actually say output, maybe we want to print, add something here. We want to print how many questions were answered correctly. Okay. If we want to count the ones that were correct, then here, if answer matches, print correct, and add 1 to the correct answer count. Okay, so that's sort of in the processing there, and then in the pseudocode. Okay, in the pseudocode here, we could have another variable here called, I'll call this correct answers, which to begin with is 0, but whenever one's counts as correct, we could say correct answers equals itself plus 1, so that increments. And then, thanks for playing, and then print, we could just print you answered, and then, comma, it's the way we sort of, you answered correct answers correctly. Maybe if we're doing pseudocode, we could just say plus or something, because the comma in Python actually means like add this stuff together. You answered, and then it'll print out the number here correctly. Okay, so let's I'm just actually going to copy this line and come over to the actual Python program, and I'm going to put that there last. But now we need to actually we need to declare this actual variable, and then here we need to, if they get it correct, we need to increment that by 1. Okay, I'm going to save that, run it. Okay, so in the print, we'll say I was missing the parentheses, which are the round brackets. I'll put those in, save it, say run. I'm going to try 3 again. A2. Okay. I'm going to say, I'll get this one wrong. A1, that was incorrect. And then A1. Thanks for playing. It must be string, not int. Okay. So, when we want to print out, we just need to convert this number by saying str to string. It's like the opposite. Like here, when the user typed in that number, it came in as like a string, or string sort of just means text, and we converted that to an integer. Here, correct answers is created like as an integer variable type. When we go to print that out, we just need to convert it to a string so that it should print out correctly. Okay, so whenever you print out a number, you can just convert it to string like that, and then it should print out fine. So we'll do this again. I'm just actually going to answer 2 questions. I'll get this one wrong, and then I'll try to get this one right. Okay, well, the spacing's not so good here, but it is right. You answered 1 correctly, so let's just, last thing, let's just fix that. Fix that spacing. So I'm just going to put a space, the easy way we can do that is put a space there at the end of that quote, and then a space at like the start of that, and it will actually, whatever's in the quote will be printed, including the spaces, so that should be printed out. Okay, so last time we run it, I'll get that one wrong. Try to get this one right. There we go, you answered 1 correctly. Great. So we'll leave that one here.